Welcome to another episode of the Young and Driven podcast. I am your host, Olivia. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, I want to thank you and welcome you. You're in for a treat. This is a short podcast meant for all different types of creatives. It's really meant just to lift and inspire you. We'll be discussing many different topics that we as creatives often go through, but things that often get overlooked. So hopefully you enjoy the podcast and let's get right into it. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. In today's episode, I really want to talk about fear. I really want to break down what exactly is fear and what can we do as people to overcome it. No matter what type of fear it is or how it presents itself, whether that be a fear of failure, sometimes even a fear of success, fear of rejection, fear of selling out, all different types of fears that you as a creative most likely at some point in time will face in your career. So let's start by breaking down what exactly is fear. And to me, fear is somewhat of a secondary emotion, meaning it has to be triggered by something. And sometimes it can be triggered by outside forces, so other people's opinions or beliefs being projected on you can cause you to have fears. But I would say 99.9% of the time, fear is an emotional response that you're having to a particular belief that you have, right? Regardless if you're aware of it consciously or if it's deep in your subconscious, how you view yourself, what you believe about yourself affects you in many ways. And it can come out in different type of fears that you have. Take, for example, if you're someone that's afraid of dogs, like you don't like little dogs, you don't like big dogs, for whatever reason, you have this fear about dogs. And you might even feel like you have justification. Let's say a situation happened when you were younger with a dog, and now, let's say you got bit by a dog when you were younger, and now you're afraid of all type of dogs, right? And you might feel like, I have a valid reason for this fear, right? But honestly, the only difference between you and someone who doesn't have a fear of dogs is your belief. You might see dogs as dangerous and something that you should stay away from, and somebody else that doesn't have a fear of dogs doesn't have that belief in their mind at all. And I know I'm making it sound real simple and real easy, but I really want to break fear down in this way, because if you start to look at fear as a response and kind of a secondary issue, then it allows you to really think about it and see what is causing your fear. And as you do that, you'll start to notice that a lot of your fears are based on insecurities or, like I said, old beliefs that you've been telling to yourself that you just probably consciously haven't been aware of. And once you consciously start to become aware of some of the insecurities that you have or some of the old beliefs that you have, then it's easy to change them. Let's take, for example, the fear of failure. Let's say you're a music artist whose goal is to be successful in the music business, whatever that may look like for you. And you notice you have this fear of failure. And it sometimes presents itself like when you're in the studio, you may put all this pressure on you to make the perfect song, to make the perfect album, because you don't want to look like a failure, you don't want your project to flop, or it might even stop you from releasing music, or from trying new things, right? You don't want to experiment as an artist because you fear that you might look like a failure, people are not going to get whatever sound you're trying to come up with. So I think a great way to try to tackle this fear would be almost head on and really ask yourself, if the worst happened, let's say you put out a song or a project and it quote unquote failed, you flopped, right? Ask yourself, what does this really mean? Because if you really think about it, if you fail at whatever it is that you're trying at, if you fail, what really changes about you? Nothing physically changes. Most likely life is still the same as you know it. Nothing changed. So what is it that you actually fear, or what exactly happens when you fail? And the only thing that is different, since nothing changes in your life physically, is how you see yourself, a belief that you're telling about yourself. You see this failure as something that's defining you or changing you in some way. You believe when you fail, it's basically proof that you're not good enough or not deserving of what it is that you want to achieve. What you actually fear is that insecurity or that belief being proven. That is what you fear. And once you realize that and understand that all you have to do is change that belief, and that fear will go away, things become a lot easier. Now, obviously, that's a lot easier said than done. But I would say once you get to this step, a lot of the hard work is already done. Once you can admit what it is that you're truly afraid of and be honest with yourself, I would say a lot of the hard work is pretty much done. A lot of people can't be honest with their own self and admit their own insecurities that they have with themselves. So once you achieve this, then you can start following these next few steps that I'm going to give you to help you overcome that fear. So the first step that I have is basically address where your fear comes from. So this is basically what I previously just talked about, of really uncover the belief that you're having, that you're telling yourself that is presenting this fear. And this might take a while, so feel free, to take days, sit and write, go on a walk, whatever you feel like you want to do, to really sit with yourself and uncover what belief you're telling yourself that is causing this fear. And a lot of times, like I said, it's subconscious, so don't be afraid to take your time if this takes you a while, because once you do this, the next few things are real easy to follow. So for step 2, the next thing you really want to be able to do is to be able to sit with your fear. Really be comfortable feeling fearful. Any emotion that you face as a human or feel as a human is not inherently wrong, right? A lot of times when we have emotions that we're not comfortable with, we quickly try to hide them or suppress them in some type of way. And though fear is something you don't want to let hold you back, it's okay to kind of sit with it for a while and just give yourself that reassurance that the way you're feeling is perfectly normal and fine. And when you do that, it's just going to take a lot of stress off you and just really make it easier for you to deal with getting over this fear. A lot of times when we have fears, it can bring up other emotions like shame, guilt, or embarrassment because you feel you're afraid. So by you just really sitting and becoming comfortable with you having fears, it's just going to take a lot of pressure off you and just make it easier for you to remove this fear ultimately. And for my third step for removing fear, I would say practice visualization. So as we stated earlier in the episode, when you fail or whatever it is that you fear, when that happens, you notice nothing physically in your life has changed. Nothing changed about you, nothing changed about your life. You might think how people see you might change, but honestly, you'll never truly know what people think or feel about you, so that shouldn't be something you should worry about at all. So, when you practice visualization, obviously that's not going to change anything in your physical life as well. Well, at least not immediately. But what it will do is allow you to see yourself in a different way, and that will allow you to create new beliefs that you're now telling yourself. Instead of letting whatever you fear define you negatively, you can now flip that fear into something positive. So we'll go back to the example of the fear of failure. Instead of looking at that failure as something that proves that you're not good enough or that you shouldn't try, you can now look at that quote-unquote failure to mean something completely different. So let's, for example, say you look at failure as experience gained, right? If you want to be great at anything, you need experience at it. So instead of being afraid to quote unquote fail, just look at yourself as gaining more experience at whatever it is that you're trying to do. And by doing this, it's going to slowly over time really change your perception of fear. No matter how it presents itself or shows up in your life, you'll be able to deal with fear accordingly by really breaking down where it comes from and really slowly start changing those beliefs that you have. That concludes another episode of the Young and Driven podcast. Hopefully you really enjoyed it. If you did, please go ahead and leave a like, subscribe, leave a review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. If you want to follow me and more of what I'm doing, you can follow me on my IG at Young and Driven, as well as on my YouTube at Young and Driven. And I will talk to you guys in the next episode.